My heart was beating so hard in my chest that it felt like it was going to jump out. I was paralyzed, but I couldn't falter now. Not there. Not in front of hundreds of people. The hall was huge, with bright lights reflecting off every golden detail on the walls and the muffled sound of the audience's murmurs echoing around me. All eyes were on me, but I could only see one person, Mrs. Thompson. She was sitting in the back, dressed formally, her face pale and tense, as if she could hardly believe what she was seeing. My name was written in large letters on the screen, behind me, announcing my achievement. I swallowed hard as I brought the microphone to my lips. "This one's for those who ever doubted me," I said, my voice firm, cutting through the silence. The room erupted in applause, but she remained motionless, silent, as if she had been hit by an invisible train. Want to know how I got here? How I turned humiliation into triumph. Subscribe to the channel and follow my journey of overcoming adversity, elegant revenge, and redemption. You won't want to miss a single detail of this exciting story. I'm Clara Bennett, and this is my story. I'm 32 years old, but my journey began long before that, in a stifling classroom in Melbourne, where the summer heat seemed to melt not only the asphalt outside, but also my confidence. Mrs. Thompson was the first person who really hurt me with words. She was the kind of teacher everyone feared, demanding, critical, and sometimes cruel. With her thick glasses and always impeccably dressed, she had a way of looking at you as if she could see all your flaws, even the ones you tried to hide. That day, at age 12, I was sitting in the back row, trying to make myself invisible. But she pulled me into the spotlight with a phrase that has never left my mind. "Clara, you're going to be nothing in life." I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. But all I did was lower my head as my classmates' laughter echoed around me. She doesn't know it, but those words were the fuel that drove me for years. I'm not that lost little girl anymore. Today, I'm the creative director of one of Australia's largest advertising agencies, and my name is engraved on awards that prove she was wrong. My father, Jack, is also part of this story. He's not a classic hero, nor is he someone great. He's just a simple man, retired after years of driving trucks on the dusty roads of the countryside. But he always believed in me. When I came home crying or frustrated, he would say, "Show them, Clara. Show them they can doubt you, but they'll never stop you." Those words stuck with me like a silent promise. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, is the opposite of all that. She represents the weight of judgment, the pain of being discredited. She never knew the impact she had on me. But now, decades later, she will finally understand. Because this isn't just a story of revenge, it's a story about overcoming adversity. And in the end, when she's sitting there in that chair, speechless, I'm going to show her, and myself, that no one can define who we are but ourselves. This is my fight, and each of these characters has played a part in it. You'll understand better as you follow this journey. The ceremony hall was like something out of a dream, but I could hardly appreciate its beauty because my nerves were on edge. The sweet smell of fresh flowers hung in the air, mixed with the slight citrus scent of the expensive perfumes of the people around me. It was a scent that screamed success, power, and for me, an almost surreal feeling of, I made it. The white lights were so bright that they seemed to envelop me in a scorching heat, even with the air conditioning running at full blast. Each step echoed on the polished marble floor, shiny as a mirror, reflecting the women's high heels and the men's impeccable shoes. I felt the weight of my own black boots against this elegant backdrop, as if reminding me that no matter how hard I tried to fit in, I still carried the marks of someone who had been discredited. The tables were set with immaculate white tablecloths, each decorated with thin candles that flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the golden walls. There was crystal everywhere, in the glasses, in the gigantic chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, and in the details of the decorations. The sound of clinking cutlery and polite laughter filled the room, but it all seemed distant to me, as if I were in a bubble. My attention was fixed on that woman in the back, sitting alone at a table near the wall. Mrs. Thompson. Her simple black dress contrasted with the glamour around her, and she seemed out of place, tense, as if she knew that this moment was not about her. But somehow, it was also completely hers. I could feel the weight of the microphone in my hands, cold and metallic, as I waited for my turn to go on stage. My heart was beating so hard that I was sure everyone could hear it. Outside, through the huge glass windows, I could see the city lit up, the lights of the buildings competing with the stars in the night sky. Everything inside seemed perfect, almost unreal. But I knew that this wasn't just a glamorous event. It was the battlefield where I would finally face my past. And when I stepped onto that stage, nothing else would matter but the truth I was about to reveal. It all started with a phrase that never left my mind. I was only 12 years old, but that moment is etched in my memory as if it were yesterday. It was a hot summer afternoon in Melbourne, and the classroom felt like an oven. The windows were open, but the still air brought no relief. We were in the middle of an English class, and Mrs. Thompson was walking between the rows, collecting our notebooks to grade the essays we had written the week before. My heart was pounding as I handed in my work. I had worked so hard, writing and rewriting those pages, trying to do something that would really impress her. But when she took my notebook, her expression changed. She looked at me over her glasses, and I knew something was wrong. "Clara," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "this is awful." My cheeks burned, and I felt all eyes on me. She held my notebook as if it were something dirty. "You have no creativity, no discipline, and no talent. Frankly, Clara, you're going to be nothing in life." The sound of my classmates' laughter was deafening. I wanted to disappear, but all I could do was lower my head and swallow the tears that were welling up in my eyes. That comment wasn't just criticism. It was a mortal blow to my heart. For weeks after that, I could barely look at my classmates or raise my hand in class. I became invisible, just as she had predicted. But here's the secret. That humiliation also ignited something inside me. A silent anger, a fervent desire to prove her wrong. No matter how much it hurt, I knew I had to show her and myself that her words did not define who I was. And so I began to fight. I worked hard, even when no one believed in me. I remember sleepless nights studying under the dim light of my bedroom lamp, trying to improve my grades. I remember coming home exhausted after long hours waiting tables at a noisy cafe, my hands smelling of cold coffee and grease. There were days when I thought about giving up, when her criticism echoed in my mind like a curse. But whenever that happened, I remembered something my father used to say to me. "Show them, Clara. Show them that they can doubt you, but they'll never stop you." And so I continued, step by step. Each small victory was like a brick building, a wall against those cruel words. When I got my first high grade in English, I took the paper home and hung it on the refrigerator. When I got my scholarship, I cried alone in my room because I knew that was the beginning of something bigger. However, the conflict never went away. Even when I started working at advertising agencies, I faced new challenges. There were jealous colleagues who spread rumors about me, bosses who doubted my ability, and moments when I stumbled and fell. But each obstacle only reminded me more vividly of that classroom, Mrs. Thompson, and her cruel prophecy. And every time I got up, it was like slapping her in the face, symbolically speaking. So when I finally reached the pinnacle of my career and was chosen as the honoree of the night at a national ceremony, I knew this was my chance to settle this conflict once and for all. I sent a special invitation to Mrs. Thompson with my name, highlighted as the award-winning creative director. I wasn't just accepting an award, I was proving her wrong. And now, there in the shiny hall, with her sitting in that uncomfortable chair and the microphone in my hands, I finally had the opportunity to face her. It was more than revenge, it was justice. My first crisis happened early in my journey, when I was still trying to find myself and prove Mrs. Thompson wrong. I was 16, and things weren't easy at home. My father, Jack, worked as a truck driver and was away for weeks at a time, while I tried to balance school with a part-time job at the local cafe. It was an exhausting routine, waking up at 5 in the morning to help my dad pack his bags before he left for another trip, going to school, rushing back to the cafe and waiting tables until late at night. My hands smelled like stale coffee and bacon grease, and my back ached from carrying heavy trays. But I kept going because I had to. I had to prove to myself and the world that I was capable. It was on one of those chaotic days that everything fell apart. I was at the cafe, trying to keep up with the lunch rush, when I knocked over a tray of hot drinks onto a customer. The sound of glass shattering on the floor was deafening, followed by the man's angry scream as hot coffee dripped down his clothes. I froze for a moment, feeling the heat rise to my face. The manager came running over, red with rage, yelling in front of everyone, "You're useless! You're not cut out for this!" His eyes were like fists punching my soul. I lowered my head, grabbed the nearest rag, and started cleaning up the mess. But tears were already streaming down my face. His words echoed inside me, useless. The same word Mrs. Thompson had used years ago. It seemed like I would never escape it. That night was one of the hardest of my life. I came home exhausted, still wearing my coffee-stained uniform, and cried myself to sleep. I thought about giving up. I thought about dropping out and accepting that maybe they were right. Maybe I really wasn't good enough. That's when I found something at the bottom of my backpack that changed everything. An old notebook with the stories I had written when I was 12, the ones Mrs. Thompson had called horrible. I reread each page, remembering how I felt when I wrote them. And I realized something important. Even though they were imperfect, those stories had heart. They had soul. They were mine. At that moment, I decided I couldn't give up. Not because of her, not because of the cafe manager. For me, I started to try even harder. I spent hours after work studying, reading books I borrowed from the public library, and practicing writing whenever I had a free moment. During my shift at the cafe, I scribbled ideas on napkins while waiting for orders to be ready. Every piece I wrote was a small victory against all the voices that told me I wasn't good enough. However, the internal battle continued. There were times when I wanted to throw it all away, especially when it seemed like no one noticed my efforts. But I repeated to myself, like a mantra, "She's wrong. She's wrong." One day, I got an opportunity that would change everything. A new teacher at school, Ms. Allen, asked the students to submit essays for a regional creative writing contest. I hesitated. What if it was another failure? What if they laughed at me again? But something inside me said I had to try. I spent weeks writing and rewriting, polishing every sentence until it sounded perfect. When I handed in my essay, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. Would someone finally see my worth? Weeks later, I received a letter at school. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was news that would change my perspective forever. I had won second place in the contest. It wasn't first place, but it was more than I ever imagined. Mrs. Allen smiled at me and said, "You have talent, Clara. Keep going." Those words were like a balm for the wounds Mrs. Thompson had left. Finally, someone believed in me. But victory brought another wave of challenges. My classmates began spreading rumors that I had only won because I cheated, or because the judge felt sorry for me. I heard whispers in the hallways and muffled laughter during recess. Once again, I felt that sense of being judged and discredited. However, this time, I knew I couldn't let it get me down. I faced each comment with my head held high, determined to keep going. That little spark of confidence I gained from the contest turned into something bigger, a conviction that I was capable of overcoming any obstacle. That first crisis was like a crucial lesson in my journey. It showed me that no matter how difficult it was, I would always find ways to move forward. And in the end, it prepared me for the even greater challenges that lay ahead. That victory in the writing contest was like a beacon in the darkness. Finally, something was going right. For the first time in my life, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I could prove Mrs. Thompson wrong. Mrs. Allen's words still echoed in my mind. "You have talent, Clara. Keep going." They were so different from the cruel criticism of my former teacher. That small achievement gave me a sense of relief, as if I had found a way to escape the weight of negative expectations I had been carrying on my shoulders. Little by little, I began to notice changes around me. My grades improved, and teachers began to notice my efforts. At the cafe where I worked, I started receiving compliments from regular customers who said I was quick or friendly. Even my classmates seemed less hostile, although I knew some were still whispering behind my back. I clung to these moments of recognition as if they were proof that I was on the right track. Even my father, always my biggest supporter, started talking about how I was shining. He even hung my award-winning essay on the refrigerator next to a photo of us together. It was as if, for the first time, I was finally finding my place in the world. But the truth is that feeling of security was fragile, like glass about to crack under pressure. As much as I tried to ignore it, I knew there were still voices inside me that doubted. Part of me still feared that it was all just luck, that at any moment I would be exposed again as the girl who will never amount to anything. Still, I decided to enjoy the moment. For the first time, I began to dream of something bigger. I imagined myself studying at a university, writing books, creating impactful advertising campaigns. Everything seemed possible, as if I had finally found a way to escape the past. That's when I received the news that would change everything again. During my senior year of high school, I was awarded a partial scholarship to a college in Sydney. It wasn't a full scholarship, but it was more than I ever imagined I could achieve. I cried when I found out, both out of happiness and relief. It felt like I had finally escaped Mrs. Thompson's shadow. I faced the final months of school with renewed determination, convinced that my life was about to change forever. But, as I've learned over the years, life has a cruel way of reminding you that nothing is guaranteed. Shortly before I moved to Sydney, the first blow came. I found out that the scholarship wouldn't cover all the costs, and my father, with his modest salary as a truck driver, couldn't afford the rest. I would need to work full-time while studying, something that seemed impossible. I remember sitting on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by papers and acceptance letters, and feeling the weight of it all come crashing down on me. The false sense of security I had built began to crumble. Even so, I made a decision. I was going. No matter how hard it was, I would find a way. I packed my bags with the little I had and moved to Sydney. In the first few months, everything seemed to be working out. I got a job at a marketing agency, serving coffee and organizing documents. My colleagues were nice, and I was excited about my classes. But I soon realized that adult life was much harder than I had imagined. Working during the day and studying at night left me exhausted. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, questioning whether it was worth continuing to fight. And then came the second blow. I was unfairly fired. A jealous colleague sabotaged an important project and blamed me. When I confronted my boss, he just said, "I'm sorry, Clara. You're good, but this can't happen." It was like another punch in the stomach. I went home crying, thinking that maybe that brief sense of security had been just an illusion. But deep down, I knew I couldn't give up. That moment of false calm had shown me that I was capable of overcoming challenges, and that even when everything seemed lost, I would find a way to keep going. Getting fired was like a punch in the gut that I didn't see coming. I was already struggling to keep everything together, working during the day, studying at night, paying the bills, and still trying to feel like a normal person every now and then. But losing that job? That was more than just a financial crisis. It was a direct blow to my confidence. It was as if the universe was laughing at me, saying, "Did you really think you could do it?" My colleague Sarah had been spreading rumors about me for weeks, insinuating that I was arrogant, that I thought I was better than everyone else just because I had gone to college. When she sabotaged the agency's project, no one hesitated to believe her. After all, who would doubt the girl who always seemed to be trying to prove something? I went home that night completely devastated. The bus was full of strangers, but I could feel their eyes piercing through me, judging my every move. Or maybe it was just my imagination, fueled by the shame I felt. I arrived at my small shared apartment, threw my bag on the floor, and collapsed on the couch. For the first time in months, I let the tears flow without trying to hold them back. Each drop seemed to carry the weight of all the years of struggle, all the times someone told me I would never amount to anything. And deep down, Mrs. Thompson's cruel voice echoed again, "You're going to be nothing in life." The next day, I tried to look for another job, but nothing seemed to work out. I sent resumes to cafes, stores, and even fast food restaurants, but the responses were always the same. "We're sorry," but it felt like I was stuck in an endless cycle of rejection. My father called a few times, worried, but I could barely talk to him. How could I explain that I was failing? That all the effort I had put in up to that point seemed to no longer matter? I knew he wanted to help me, but I also knew he couldn't afford to support me. He was already doing a lot just by paying part of my apartment rent. Then came the second part of the crisis. I started running out of money. My savings, which were already meager, quickly evaporated. I stopped buying basic things, a decent cup of coffee in the morning, a hot dinner at night, to save what little I had left. I started wearing old clothes to class, even though I knew they were faded and worn out. Sometimes I went to bed hungry because I couldn't afford to buy food. I remember one particular day when I went to the supermarket and put a few items in my cart, only to realize I didn't have enough money to pay for them. I stood there, holding the cart, as tears began to stream down my face. A woman behind me asked if I was okay, and I could only shake my head before running away, ashamed. But the worst was yet to come. A month later, I received a letter from the university informing me that I needed to resolve my financial situation, or I would be dropped from the program. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Everything I had fought for, the scholarship, the classes, the sacrifices, was about to fall apart. I could barely breathe as I read those cold words on the paper. I called the coordinator, begging for more time, but she was adamant. "Clara, I understand your situation, but we have rules." I hung up the phone and cried myself to sleep. That crisis was different from the others because it struck something deeper: my identity. I had always clung to the idea that I was a fighter, someone who never gave up. But now, sitting alone in my apartment with overdue bills and shattered dreams, I wondered if that was true. Maybe I was exactly what they always said I was, a girl who would never amount to anything. But in the midst of that darkness, something inside me refused to give up. I remembered all the times I got up after falling down, all the sleepless nights, studying, all the little moments of victory I had accumulated over the years. I knew I couldn't give up. Not now, not after I had come so far. So I made a radical decision. I sold everything I could, clothes, books, even my old cell phone, and used the money to pay for my first semester of college. I got a second job, working as a cleaning lady in an office during the night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to keep me going. That crisis changed something fundamental in me. It showed me that no matter how difficult things get, there is always a way to move forward. Yes, I was exhausted, broken, and scared. but I was also determined. And that determination would be what would lead me to the next chapter of my journey, and eventually to the stage of that ceremony where I would finally face Mrs. Thompson. It was during my senior year of college that I faced the most difficult crisis of all, not because it was physically exhausting, but because it presented me with a moral dilemma that shook my convictions to their core. I was working as an intern at a renowned advertising agency, trying to balance endless hours at the office with college deadlines. It was a crucial time. If I could impress my superiors, there was a real chance I would be hired full-time after graduation. It was everything I had fought for, everything that meant escaping a life of hardship and constant struggle. But then, something happened that would completely change the game. A major corporate client hired our agency to develop an important advertising campaign. The entire team was under pressure to deliver something brilliant, and I was assigned to help with the initial research and copywriting. I worked tirelessly, spending sleepless nights reviewing every detail, tweaking every word. When we finally presented the project to the client, they were impressed, or so we thought. The next day, we received a call saying they were unhappy with the result. They said they wanted something bolder and threatened to cancel the contract if we didn't deliver a new version within a few days. That's when my boss, Marcus, called me into a private meeting. He was an intimidating man with sharp eyes and carefully calculated words. "Clara," he said, closing the office door, "we have a problem." He explained that another team had made a serious mistake on a previous campaign for the same client. They had used fake data in a marketing report. If this came to light, the agency's reputation would be ruined. They needed someone to take the fall, someone expendable, someone like me. "If you accept, we'll say it was your responsibility," he continued, his voice smooth as poisoned silk. "But in return, we'll guarantee your job here when you graduate. You'll have a stable position, benefits, everything you've ever wanted." My heart began to race as I processed his words. Accepting would mean sacrificing my integrity, allowing myself to be blamed for something I didn't do. But refusing could cost me everything I had fought for up to that point. That night was one of the longest of my life. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone in my trembling hands, thinking about my options. I called my father, but hung up before he answered. What would I say? That I was about to lie to save my skin? That I was willing to compromise my principles just to get ahead in life? I knew he would never approve. Instead, I thought of Mrs. Thompson, and all the times I felt discredited, judged, diminished. I thought about who I was now, and who I wanted to be in the future. Was it worth it to achieve all of this at the expense of who I really was? The next day, I decided to confront Marcus. I walked into his office with my heart in my throat, but also with a clarity I had never felt before. "I'm not taking the blame," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. "This isn't right. I'm not responsible for someone else's mistake, and I'm not going to lie to protect anyone." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold as stone. Then he smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You just lost your chance here, Clara," he said. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences." I left that room shaking, but with a strange sense of relief. I knew I had made the right choice, even if it meant giving up something that seemed like my dream life. In the days that followed, I started looking for other opportunities, sending out resumes and making contacts. It was a scary time, but also liberating. I had stood up for my values, even when it felt like the world was against me. This crisis taught me something profound, that true success isn't just about achieving goals, but doing so without losing who you are. That decision shaped who I became, and it was what led me, years later, to stand on stage at that ceremony, ready to face Mrs. Thompson and prove that, even when faced with the most difficult choices, I never stopped being true to myself. After my conversation with Marcus, life seemed to fall apart even faster than I had imagined. Losing that job at the agency was like falling off a cliff, and the impact only got worse when I began to feel the real consequences of my decision. I knew I had done the right thing by refusing to take the blame for something I didn't do, but that didn't make things any easier. Without the internship, I lost the only source of income that was keeping me afloat. The bills started piling up again, and soon I received notices for late rent and utilities. It was as if all the doors I had worked so hard to open were being slammed shut in my face. To make matters worse, I found out that Marcus had spread rumors about me in the advertising market. Clara is talented but problematic, I heard, from a recruiter during a frustrating interview. She doesn't know how to work in a team. Each word was a direct stab at my pride. I knew he was trying to punish me for daring to challenge him, but that didn't lessen the pain of seeing my name tarnished before I had even really started my career. I remembered Mrs. Thompson's words. "You'll never amount to anything." Maybe she was right after all. Maybe I was destined to fail, no matter how hard I tried. But the biggest blow came when I received another letter from the college. They needed concrete proof that I could pay for the last semester. Otherwise, I would be dismissed immediately. It was a brutal blow. I had already sacrificed so much to get there. Sold my belongings, worked long nights, faced daily humiliation. And now everything seemed about to come crashing down. It was as if every obstacle I had overcome was coming back to haunt me, multiplied by 10. Sitting on the floor of my room, surrounded by collection letters and overdue bills, I felt something I had never felt before, an overwhelming sense of urgency. There was no more time to hesitate, to wait for things to get better on their own. I had to act, and fast. I decided to look for work anywhere that would hire me, even if it was temporary. I worked as a waitress in a busy restaurant, a cleaning lady in offices, and even a delivery person. My hands were always dirty, my feet swollen and sore at the end of the day, but I couldn't stop. I needed to save enough money to pay for college, even if it was the last penny. I remember one particular night when I came home after a 12-hour shift, completely exhausted. I could barely hold the plate of instant noodles I had made for dinner. But as I ate, I realized something important. I was still standing. I was still fighting. And that meant something. However, time was running out. There were only 2 weeks left until my college deadline, and I was still far from raising the money I needed. That's when I received an unexpected call from a former college professor, Mrs. Allen. She had heard about my situation through a colleague and wanted to know if I needed help. I told her everything, from my financial problems to the rumors Marcus had spread. To my surprise, she didn't judge me. Instead, she said something that changed everything. "Clara, you've already proven that you're resilient. Let me help open a door for you." Ms. Allen referred me to a small independent advertising agency that was looking for someone with passion and determination. It was a modest opportunity, but it was exactly what I needed at that moment. I rushed to the interview, wearing old, worn-out clothes, but with a sparkle in my eyes that wouldn't fade. I told the agency owner my story, leaving nothing out. Not the mistakes, not the struggles, not the times I almost gave up. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You have fire inside you. You're exactly the kind of person we're looking for." I accepted the job on the spot, even though I knew the salary wouldn't be enough to cover all my debts. But that opportunity gave me a new chance, and a renewed sense of urgency. I worked twice as hard, taking on extra shifts and additional projects to make sure I could pay for college. In the last few days before the deadline, I managed to scrape together the exact amount of money I needed to avoid being dropped. It was close, but I made it. This crisis was different from the others because it put me on a clock, forcing me to make quick and risky decisions. There were times when I thought I wouldn't make it, that all my efforts would be in vain. But it was also during this period that I learned the true meaning of urgency. Sometimes life doesn't give us comfortable choices. Sometimes all we can do is race against time and trust that the next step will be solid enough to sustain us. When I finally crossed the finish line, paying the last installment of college and securing my diploma, I knew I was ready to face any challenge that came my way, including the ceremony where I would finally face Mrs. Thompson. The ceremony was scheduled to take place in just 3 days, and I could hardly sleep. Every detail of that moment seemed to come to life in my mind, like a movie playing over and over again. I knew that night would be the culmination of everything I had been through, the final confrontation with Mrs. Thompson. But at the same time, part of me feared that something would go wrong. What if she didn't show up? What if I tripped on stage, dropped the microphone, or forgot my lines? Everything I had built could come crashing down in seconds, like a house of cards. I began to obsessively prepare every aspect of that night. I chose the black dress I wore to my college graduation because it was elegant and made me feel powerful. I made sure to review my speech several times, adjusting every word to ensure it conveyed exactly what I wanted to say. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, overcoming adversity, and redemption. I wanted everyone there to understand who I was and why this moment was so important. However, as I rehearsed in front of the mirror, I noticed how my hands trembled as I held the paper. The tension inside me grew with each passing hour. I decided to deliver the invitation to Mrs. Thompson in person. I didn't trust the mail or electronic messages. I needed to make sure she received it. I borrowed a friend's car and drove to the school where she still taught. I parked far away and watched the building for a few minutes before gathering the courage to enter. When I finally walked through the doors of the teacher's lounge, there she was, sitting at her desk, reading a book. She looked older now, with gray strands in her hair and deep wrinkles around her eyes. For a moment, I hesitated. This woman no longer seemed as intimidating as I remembered. But then her eyes met mine, and it was as if we were transported back in time to that hot classroom, where it all began. "Clara," she said, surprised. Her voice was different from the sharp tone I remembered. It was almost soft. I handed her the invitation without saying a word, but kept my gaze fixed on hers. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the envelope. I didn't answer. I turned away and left, feeling my heart race. As I drove home, I wondered if she would really come. Maybe she would pretend she never got the invitation. Maybe she would just ignore it. But something told me she would be there. Over the next few days, I began to imagine every possible scenario. What if she tried to humiliate me again? What if she stood up during my speech and said something cruel, like she did so many years ago? These thoughts consumed me, but they also fueled my determination. I couldn't let her get to me. Not this time. I spent hours practicing deep breathing, trying to calm the anxiety that overwhelmed me. I visualized the moment when I would walk onto the stage, face her gaze, and speak the words I had carried inside me for decades. On the day of the ceremony, the energy in the hall was palpable. People were chatting excitedly, waiters were circulating, with champagne, and the glow of the lights reflected off every face in the room. I was backstage, waiting for my turn to go on. My heart was beating so hard that it echoed in my ears. I looked out at the audience, and through the cracks in the curtain, I saw Mrs. Thompson sitting alone at a side table. She looked small, almost fragile, contrasting with the imposing woman I had known as a child. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, as if she knew something big was about to happen. When the presenter announced my name, the sound of applause seemed distant, as if I were in a tunnel. My legs trembled as I walked toward the microphone, but I forced myself to stand straight. I smiled at the audience, but my gaze was fixed on her. Mrs. Thompson. She didn't blink, as if she were stuck in some kind of trance. Then, when I raised the microphone and began to speak, I could feel the tension in the air. "This one goes out to those who doubted me," I said, my voice clear and firm. The silence that followed was absolute, as if even time itself had stopped. But that wasn't the end of it. Something bigger was about to happen, something I myself didn't expect. The tension was at its peak, and I knew that the real confrontation was yet to come. Sign up to follow the next chapter of this journey and find out how it all culminated on that unforgettable night. The microphone was cold against my hands, but the chill of the metal was nothing compared to the heat I felt inside. All eyes were fixed on me, but I could only see one face, Mrs. Thompson's. She was sitting there in that chair, stiff as a statue, her lips pressed together and her eyes wide. It seemed as if time had frozen for her too. Those words I had rehearsed so many times. This one is for those who ever doubted me, hung in the air like an echo that no one could ignore. And then there was silence. A silence so deep that I could hear the muffled sound of breathing around me. I took a deep breath and continued. Many years ago, someone told me that I would never amount to anything, that I was just another lost girl, with no talent and no future. My voice trembled, but not from fear. It was as if each word was a stone being thrown into a calm lake, creating waves that hit the woman sitting at that table directly. Those words hurt. A lot. But they also drove me forward. They made me work hard, fall down, get up, fight. They made me prove that I could be more than anyone expected. As I spoke, I saw something change in her face. The initial stiffness gave way to something more vulnerable, almost human. She swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought she was going to get up and run away. But she stood there, motionless, as if trapped in a web I had woven myself. I continued now with more conviction. Today, I am here not only to accept this award, but to show that that discredited little girl grew up, that she learned to overcome criticism, judgment, and humiliation, that she turned pain into strength. The audience applauded, but I barely heard them. All I could do was stare at her as the words poured out like an overflowing river. And you know what? I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that moment, for those cruel words you said in front of everyone. There was another silence, even heavier this time. Some guests began to murmur, surprised by the boldness of my speech, but I wasn't worried about them. My focus was total and absolute, Mrs. Thompson. Then came the moment I had both feared and longed for. She finally reacted. Slowly, as if coming out of a trance, she stood up. The entire room held its breath, including me. She walked to the microphone stand in the center of the stage, where the honorees usually gave their speeches. No one ever knew exactly what to expect when she picked up the microphone. Her fingers trembled, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was weak, almost inaudible. "Clara," she began, and it was as if the sound of my name coming from her lips was a knife cutting through the air. I stared at her, tense, waiting for the worst. Maybe she would try to justify her words, blame me for something, or even humiliate me again. But what she said next was completely unexpected. I was wrong. The words came out hesitant but clear. You were right. I was cruel. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. It was like an unexpected blow, only this time it didn't hurt. I was paralyzed, unable to process what was happening. She continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. At the time, I thought I was helping, that criticizing you harshly would make you try harder, but I realize now that cruelty is never helpful. I was wrong, deeply wrong. She lowered the microphone and looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. You're amazing, Clara, and I'm proud of you. For a moment, I felt the world spin. This wasn't part of my plan. I expected anger, resistance, maybe even a heated verbal confrontation. But not this, not a sincere apology. The audience was completely silent, as if no one dared to breathe. I wanted to say something, to respond, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I managed to speak. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." But inside, I knew that this moment was about more than revenge or triumph. It was about reconciliation, not just with her, but with myself. For years, I had carried that hurt like an invisible weight. Now, finally, I could put it down. I discovered that sometimes the real confrontation isn't about proving who's right or wrong. It's about finding peace. And on that stage, in front of hundreds of people, I found mine. Mrs. Thompson's confession hit me like an unexpected bolt of lightning, illuminating parts of me that I had buried deep inside. There she was, the woman who had shaped so many of my struggles, admitting her mistake out loud, in front of hundreds of people. It was surreal. I expected to see her uncomfortable, embarrassed, maybe even angry, but not that, not vulnerability, not a sincere apology. As she returned to her seat, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, surprise, and something I didn't want to acknowledge: compassion. That's when the twist I could never have predicted happened. After I stepped off the stage, still trying to process what had just happened, I was approached by a tall, gray-haired man I didn't immediately recognize. He was holding a glass of champagne and smiling warmly. "You were amazing up there," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Victor Langley. I was an English teacher at the same school as Mrs. Thompson." I greeted him, intrigued but not quite understanding what he wanted. He continued, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I knew you would be here today. I've followed your career over the years." My eyebrows rose. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. He explained that after leaving the school where I studied, he had kept in touch with some students, including me. "I always knew you were special, Clara. And I also knew how much Mrs. Thompson's comment affected you. She never meant to be cruel, at least not intentionally. That phrase was part of a pattern she had." "Pattern?" I repeated, still trying to follow. He nodded. "She did that to a lot of students. She thought that pushing them hard would make them grow. But over time, I realized that it only caused damage. Many students gave up. Some never trusted themselves again. When I heard that you had come so far, I wanted to be here to see the moment when she finally faced the consequences of her actions." That revelation left me stunned. Mrs. Thompson wasn't just a strict or cruel teacher. She was someone who carried her own scars, who transferred her wounds to others without even realizing it. It was a game-changing twist. Suddenly, the woman I saw as my greatest adversary seemed human, fragile, imperfect, just like the rest of us. Victor went on to talk about how he had tried to warn her over the years, but she always justified her methods as necessary. He himself had distanced himself from her, unable to agree with her practices. "But now," he said, looking at Mrs. Thompson at the back of the hall, "I think she finally understands. You were the proof of that." When he finished speaking, I stood frozen, taking it all in. This night wasn't just about me. It was about healing old wounds, both mine and hers. I had imagined this moment as a personal triumph, but now I realized it was much more complex than that. It was about connection, about forgiveness and moving forward. I walked over to the table where she was sitting. She looked up, hesitant, as if afraid I would reject her. But instead, I reached out my hand. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for coming, for talking. It means more than you know." She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with silent tears. Maybe, I thought, this was the real victory, turning pain into understanding. this story is far from over. If you want to know how this confrontation changed my life forever, sign up now and follow the next chapter of this exciting journey. You'll see how overcoming, forgiveness, and redemption can turn even the greatest challenges into opportunities for growth. That night changed something deep inside me, something I didn't know needed healing. As I walked home after the ceremony, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had been carrying since I was 12, when I heard those cruel words in the classroom. For all those years, I believed that my struggle was only against Mrs. Thompson, against the world she represented, and against the voices that said I would never be good enough. But now, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that my biggest conflict wasn't out there. It was inside me. I had fed that hurt for so long that it became part of who I was. Every achievement, every obstacle overcome, seemed connected to proving her wrong. I had turned her criticism into fuel, but also into a prison. As much as I wanted to believe I was fighting for my future, part of me was still stuck in the past, and it wasn't until she apologized, when she admitted her mistake in front of everyone, that I realized how much I was holding on to that resentment like armor. Armor that, while protecting me from new wounds, also prevented me from feeling free. But the conversation with Victor Langley was the final blow to that armor. He showed me that Mrs. Thompson wasn't just the villain I had created in my mind. She was human, imperfect, shaped by her own scars and mistakes. That revelation made me wonder, had I also been unfair? By turning her into a symbol of everything I wanted to overcome, had I reduced her to something she wasn't entirely? These questions echoed inside me during the entire trip home as I watched the city lights pass by the car window. When I got to my apartment, I took off my high heels and sat down on the couch, exhausted. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about everything I had been through without anger or bitterness. I remembered the sleepless nights studying, the exhausting jobs, the crises that almost made me give up. But instead of seeing each moment as a battle against myself, I began to see it as a journey of self-discovery. Everything I had been through, the falls, the victories, the moments of doubt and strength, had shaped who I was today. And maybe, I thought, that was the real lesson. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't instantaneous. But as I looked at the envelope with the invitation to the ceremony, still on the table, I realized I had taken the first step. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means recognizing that we are all flawed and that our stories are intertwined in ways we don't always understand. Mrs. Thompson had hurt me, yes, but at the same time, she had pushed me forward, even if unintentionally. And by forgiving her, I was freeing myself. That night, I wrote a letter to myself. It was something I had never done before, but I felt I needed to put everything I was feeling down on paper. Dear me, I began. Today you proved that you are capable of overcoming anything. But more importantly, you proved that you can forgive, that you can turn pain into growth, hurt into understanding. You no longer need to fight the ghosts of your past. It's time to move on. When I finished the letter, I put it in a drawer with other important documents. It was like closing a chapter of my life, a chapter I would never forget, but one that no longer defined me. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. I knew there would still be challenges ahead. After all, life is never completely free of them. But now I had something I'd been missing: inner peace. And that peace came not only from achieving success, but from finding clarity about who I was and who I wanted to be. That inner resolution was the most valuable gift I could have given myself. It wasn't about beating Mrs. Thompson or proving anything to the world. It was about accepting that I had already won. Not over her, but over my own limitations. And with that, I was ready to embrace the future without fear, without resentment, and without looking back. The ceremony ended, but the impact of that night continued to reverberate within me like a wave that never stops crashing on the shore. When I finally left the hall, I felt something different in the air. Something lighter, almost silent. It wasn't just the weight of expectations or the ghosts of the past that had disappeared. It was the feeling that I had resolved something much bigger than I had imagined. The conflict that had accompanied me for years, the one between who I was and who they wanted me to be, had finally come to an end. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my normal routine, but everything seemed different. The people around me noticed the change too. My father called to ask how the ceremony had gone, and for the first time in a long time, I was able to talk about it without feeling a lump in my throat. I told him about the speech, about Mrs. Thompson's apology, and about my conversation with Victor Langley. He was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Show them, Clara. Show them that they can doubt you, but they'll never stop you." His words, which had once been a mantra to keep me fighting, now sounded like a reminder that I had already won. But the real proof that the main conflict had been resolved came when I received an unexpected message from Mrs. Thompson herself. It was short, direct, but loaded with meaning. "Clara, I'd like to talk to you if possible. I know it may be too much to ask, but I hope we can meet soon." Those words surprised me. I thought our story had come to an end that night, but I realized there was still something unresolved, something that needed to be closed once and for all. We arranged to meet at a small, discreet cafe, away from prying eyes. She arrived first, sitting at a table in the corner, holding a cup of tea with trembling hands. When I approached, she looked up and smiled shyly, as if testing whether I would accept her presence. We greeted each other with a nod, and then she began to speak. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice low and hesitant. "That night, it opened my eyes. I always thought I was helping my students by being tough on them, but I realize now that I did more harm than good." I watched her as she spoke, noticing the wrinkles on her face and the weight on her shoulders. She was no longer the imposing woman I remembered from school. She was someone who carried her own scars, just like the rest of us. As she continued to explain how she had dealt with her personal frustrations by projecting them onto her students, I felt something I never imagined. I would feel for her, empathy. It wasn't approval or forgiveness, but understanding. I finally understood that she was also human, with flaws and pains that shaped her actions. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence between us. Then I replied, "I understand." And I think that's the most important thing right now. Understanding. My words seemed to relieve something in her, because she visibly relaxed, letting out a heavy sigh. We talked for a while longer, not about the past, but about the future. She told me she was thinking about retiring, and was even considering writing a book about her experiences as a teacher, something reflective that could help other educators avoid the same mistakes she made. At the end of our meeting, we said goodbye with a sincere handshake. There were no more hard feelings, just clarity. As I drove home, I realized that this meeting had been necessary to completely close the cycle. Mrs. Thompson was no longer the figure I used as a symbol of all my struggles. She was just a person, full of mistakes, lessons learned, and in the end, remorse. The main conflict in my life, the one between who I was and who I thought I should be, was resolved. I no longer had to prove anything to anyone, not even myself. Everything I had experienced, from the classroom where it all began to the stage where I faced my past, had brought me here. And now, finally, I could move forward without looking back. This resolution wasn't just about forgiving Mrs. Thompson. It was about forgiving myself for holding on to so much anger for so long. It was about accepting that the journey to this point had shaped who I am, but that the future could be something new. something free. The weeks following my meeting with Mrs. Thompson were like a quiet awakening. I could feel the changes not only in myself, but also in the way people around me saw me. It was as if I had taken off a mask I had been wearing for years, the one that told the world I had to be strong all the time, that I had to constantly prove my worth. Now, without that need for external validation, I felt more authentic, more like myself. My father was the first to notice. He had always been observant, even when his words were few. One night, while we were having dinner at his house, something simple, like pasta with ground beef, his favorite dish, he looked at me across the table and said, "You seem different, Clara. Lighter." I smiled at him, and for the first time, I realized he was right. I felt different. It wasn't just the absence of the weight of the past. It was the presence of something new, a sense of clarity, as if I could finally breathe without thinking about all the battles I still had to fight. At work, changes also began to appear. My colleagues commented that I seemed more confident, more sure of my decisions. Before, I used to question every choice I made, fearing that a mistake would confirm the criticism I had heard in the past. But now, I faced challenges with a new perspective. I knew that mistakes were part of the process, as was learning from them. And this was directly reflected in the agency's results. A campaign I developed for an important client was hailed as one of the most creative of the year, and for the first time, I accepted the praise without minimizing it. I knew I deserved that recognition. Ms. Thompson, on the other hand, also began to forge a new path. A few weeks after our meeting, I received a copy of the manuscript she had mentioned, a book titled Mistakes in the Classroom, Reflections of a Regretful Teacher. In the preface, she wrote something that left me speechless. This book is dedicated to Clara Bennett, whose courage taught me that it is never too late to admit our mistakes and seek redemption. I could hardly believe she had included me so publicly, but I was deeply touched. It showed that our conversation had been meaningful not only to me, but to her as well. The book launch took place months later, and she invited me to the event. It was strange to be there again, but this time not as an adversary, but as someone who had contributed to her transformation. During her speech, she thanked me publicly, saying that my journey had inspired her to confront her own demons. When our eyes met in the audience, I felt something I never imagined I would feel for her: mutual respect. She was no longer the woman who hurt me. She was someone who had learned from her mistakes and was trying to do better. But the consequences of this story didn't end there. A few months later, I received an unexpected email from Victor Langley. He had organized a small reunion with former students from the school where it all began, including some who had also been affected by Mrs. Thompson's methods. It was an opportunity to share experiences, scars, and lessons learned. At first, I hesitated. Going back to that school, even after so many years, seemed like too big a step. But then I realized that it could help others overcome their own wounds, just as I had. On the day of the meeting, I went there with a heavy heart, but ready. I saw familiar faces and others I had never seen before. Each story told was like an echo of my own journey, full of pain, doubt, and eventually growth. At the end of the meeting, many thanked me for confronting Mrs. Thompson at the ceremony, saying it inspired them to rethink their own relationships with the past. That made me realize that my story wasn't just about me. It had the power to touch other lives. Those consequences changed everything. Not only did I resolve my internal conflict, but I also helped others find peace. Mrs. Thompson found redemption. My father saw his daughter finally free from the shadows of the past. And me? I discovered that true strength isn't about defeating others, but about healing your scars and moving forward. And that's how everything changed, not just for me, but for all of us. Looking back, I realized that this story was never just about me or Mrs. Thompson. It was about something much bigger: how we deal with our scars, how we turn pain into strength, and how we find meaning in chaos. For years, I carried those cruel words like a mark on my skin, as if they were part of who I was. But now I understand that they didn't define me, just as Mrs. Thompson's mistakes didn't define her. We are all imperfect human beings, shaped by choices, influences, and moments we cannot control. What really matters is what we do with those experiences. The journey here has taught me that true power lies in the ability to forgive, not just others, but ourselves. For a long time, I punished myself for every mistake, every misstep, as if I needed to prove to the world that I was worthy. But the truth is, no one needs to prove their worth to others. You just need to recognize it within yourself. And that recognition only came when I stopped fighting the ghosts of my past, when I accepted that Mrs. Thompson wasn't my eternal enemy, but someone who was also lost in her own pain. I found peace. And by freeing her, I freed myself. This story also made me reflect on the impact of words. Mrs. Thompson probably never imagined that her cruel comment would echo for decades in the mind of a shy little girl. Similarly, I didn't expect my speech at the ceremony to touch so many lives. Words have weight, and that's something I learned the hard way. They can hurt deeply, but they can also heal. They can build walls or tear them down. And in the end, I realized that the most important words are the ones we choose to set ourselves free, whether it's a sincere apology, a confession of regret, or a declaration of forgiveness. Another central theme of this journey has been resilience. People often ask me how I managed to keep going despite all the difficulties. The answer is simple: because there was no other option. Every crisis, every obstacle, every moment of doubt was like a step on an invisible staircase. No matter how exhausted I was, there was always something inside me that said, "Get up. You can do this." And it was that quiet determination that got me here. But resilient does not mean invulnerable. I cried, I screamed, I doubted. And that's okay. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. Ultimately, this story is about human connection. At first, I saw Mrs. Thompson as a barrier, an opponent I needed to defeat to prove my worth. But along the way, I discovered that she was just another human being trying to navigate life with her own scars. It made me think, how often do we judge others without understanding their context? How often do we project our own insecurities onto them? In the end, I realized that we are all connected by the same universal issues: love, fear, pain, redemption. And that by embracing that connection, we can find healing. Today, when I think about this journey, I feel gratitude. For the pain that taught me to be strong, for the mistakes that showed me how to grow, and for the people who crossed my path, even if they initially seemed like adversaries. This journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in the end, it brought me something that no award or applause could ever offer: the certainty that our greatest victory is not in proving something to the world, but in reconciling ourselves with who we are. If you want to continue following reflections and stories like this, sign up and be part of this journey of growth and overcoming. Together we can learn to transform our scars into strength.